Good evening, everybody. So it actually the sugya starts on Chav Gimel Amud Beis. Kisolik Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana left Bav, went up to Eretz Yisrael. Ashkech levnei Reb Chia the Yosef Ka'amri. The children of Rav Chia were sitting in Beis Medrash and learning, and they asked a funny question. Isaron shecholku. So they had a mincha. The standard mincha had an isaron of flour, and it was divided into two pieces, into two halves. V'inichu b'bisa. It was put into a bowl, but the two pieces of the mincha did not touch. And we are now going to examine the concept of whether a kli is mitzaref two items within the kli, even though they don't touch. I mean, there's a mahus of a kli, especially a kli shoris, that can make it one, even though it's not physically one. So we're going to examine that. So when someone is tameh, let's say they touched nevela, or they touched a sheretz, and they're tameh. So when they go in the mikvah, let's say 10 o'clock in the morning, they're a tvul yom. A tvul yom cannot touch meiser. It cannot touch truma. It can eat meiser, but not truma, and not hegdish. He has to wait until Herav Shemesh. Then that night, the sun goes down, now he can eat truma and kodshim. Then there's somebody called Mechusar Kippurim. For example, a Zava, any person who's a Tomei because of his physical body has an emission. A Zava, male or female that has an emission, a Metzora, or a Yoledes. Those four are in a category of Mechusar Kippurim. So you have Tvul Yom, you have Erev Shemesh. Now those four that I mentioned, at nightfall, they cannot eat kodshim. They can eat truma, but not kodshim. They have to go on the 8th day and bring korbanos. They are considered mechusar kippurim until they bring korbanos on the 8th day, then they can eat kodshim. So a tvul yom, if he touches one of the items, half of the yisaron in the kli, mau. Does the other piece of mincha that he didn't touch does become tameh? Kit. Now, why would I think so? Kit nan kli mitzaref masha b'sochel kodesh. When you have two pieces, and a klishar and a tvul yom touches them, the klishar has the ability to combine them. But that's only if the two pieces within the kli are touching each other. So even though the tvul yom doesn't touch that physical piece, but he touches the other piece, but since they're connected, the kli is mitzvah for them to transfer the tumah to the other piece. But that's maybe only if they're touching. But maybe if there's a separation between the two pieces, lo. O dilma loishna. Or perhaps there's no difference. Maybe the kli will combine it l'tumah, even when they're not in contact. Armalu iu. So Rav Kahana responded, mitnan kli mechaber. The word says mechaber. It doesn't say that the kli joins them. Kli mitzaref tnan koldu. It says it combines them. That it becomes like one no matter what, even if they're not touching. So Rav Kahana understood that the tvul yom who touches the other piece the other piece would become tummy as well by virtue of the klisharis. Okay. Another question was asked by the Bnei Rav Chia. Hoishit echad lebeinein. Let's say in between these two pieces, there was from another mincha, another half isaron put in between the two. And the tvul yom touched this intervening piece. do the other two pieces become tamei? Now, the other piece had already come from a kli shores. It already become remember, a mincha becomes a mincha once it's put into a kli shores. So this piece came from that kli already. So Rav Kana answered, Tzarich lekli kli mitzarfo. If there was some kind of halachic process that occurred because of that kli and a chanami, the tumah would convey to the other pieces. But ein tzarich lekli, ein kli mitzarfo. This piece did not need this kli. It had become miskadish in another kli sharis. So it's not tzarich lekli. So then this kli is not mitzarif, this new piece with the other pieces. That's the second question. Hoishit tvul yom says bo b'nein. The tvul yom puts his finger in the airspace between the two pieces. We're still talking about two isroinos, two half isroinos of mincha. And he's not touching them. His finger's in between them. Now, where do we see an example where something can be metame without actually touching? We have it by klichores, by klicheres, right? If you have food in an earthenware kli, and you put your finger or anything dangles into the airspace over that kli cheres, even without touching the wall of the kli or the food inside becomes tummy. So Rav Kana answered, there is no other example in halacha where something can become tummy via airspace alone. And since here this tvul yom didn't touch the flour, he put it in the airspace, it will not convey tumah. Okay. So up until now, the Bnei Rav Chia were asking Rav Kahana the questions. Now Rav Kahana turned around and asked them a question. Let's say kmitza hadn't been taken, right? Where the Kohen goes in with his hand and does kmitza, hasn't been taken yet. And the two isroinos, or the two half isroinos are in the kli, they're not touching. And you're going to do kmitza by one of the half, will it work for the other? Do we say that when we say kli is mitzaref, is it on the level of doraisa or the rabbanon? If we say it's doraisa, and we say that you combine them, then if you do kmitza for one of the sides, one of the halves, the other one doesn't need a new kmitza. If it's lomi rabbanon, we would say no. Amru lo, zulo shamanu. I don't have the specific answer to that question you asked, but kayotzu b'shamanu. But a similar one I do. This none from the Mishnah that we learned. Shnei menachos shelo nikmetzu v'nisar v'zu b'zu. We had two menachos. Kmitza had not been taken from either of them, and they got mixed up with each other. What did the Mishnah say? Im yachol likmotz mizu b'fnei atzmo mizu b'fnei atzmo ksheros. If those minchas had sat in the kli where they were still separate enough where you could do kmitza from each one of them, that was okay. But if they had become completely intermingled with each other, lo, imlav psulos. Now, when you say that they were separate enough that you could do kmitza, amai. Now, why would that work? Hachtamariv halonaga. The Gemara's Havamina seems here is that those two menachos were not touching each other. Yet we say that it works. So much be that the kli is being mitzarifit. So Amarava, you can't prove from that anything. Because Dilma Bagushna Machulokana Masrek, it's like a comb. A masrek is a comb where they were touching. It's not like the Havamina of the Gemara was that they were completely unconnected. They were connected in the top and maybe not in the other parts. So the Gemara didn't answer my Haviyalo. What about this question of when you have two parts of a mincha on either side of the kli, you do kmitza on one of them, does it work for the other side? Amar Rav Toshma. the Tanya. It says, Veherim mimenu mikumtso. You got to separate the kmitza. Min hamachuber. So if you're going to take kmitza, it's got to be attached to the original thing. You can't bring some flour in one kli and some flour in the other kli, and you do kmitza with only one of them, and it works for both. But But if you have a kli, one kli with the two menachos or the two menachos in the kli as if it was brought into kelim, so that would work, and the kmitza would work. So Rava seems to suggest that it would work, and that's a proof. Amar le'Abaye, no. Dilma shnei kelim echidami. Don't learn like you said that two kelim is you bring them in two separate kelim. Kagon kvitza b'kabba. You have like those when you buy a toy. Sometimes you see like one kli, it's in another kli. You have a smaller kli and a bigger kli, and the kvitza only holds 3/4 of a kav, and the bigger vessel held a kav. So there was overflow that you filled up the inner one, so it overflowed into the other one. That you could say that the two menachos are connected on the top of it. Kiven the mifsik bechitzos the kviz mitata. The smaller vessel on the inside is separating them on the bottom. Then it's not considered that doing kmitz on one part would work for the other part. That's the case of two kelim. And then kliyecha dumi de shnei kelim echidami. So then what, based on that type of shnei kelim, what would we mean when we say then you bring it in one kli? Kigon arivasa shel tarnagolim. Like when you feed chickens and you have two chalokim of this trough, one for food, one for water. And there's a separation between them. Even though there's like a wall between them, but hanagia, but there is a connection. They touch each other. But in the case of the mincha, we had a big kli, some of the flour was on one side, some of the flour was on the other side, and they're not touching at all. We could still have our shaila, the theoretical shaila of doing kmitz on one side of it. Will the kli be mitzarefit so that it would work for the other side? So we don't really have an answer. Boy Rav Yirmiyah. So again, we have in a kli two halves, but they don't touch. One of those pieces are connected by water to another another half isaron from another mincha, and it's outside that kli. And we had asked the shaila, right? If the tful yom touches one of it, does it convey to the other? The shaila is now more complicated. Boy, Rav Yirmiyah, tziruf kli v'chibur mayim. You have piece A and piece B. The tful yom touched piece A, and we say the kli was mitzaref in order to say piece B also has the tumah, and piece B is connected to C, which is connected by water outside the kli. So it's not a direct tumah; it's the tumah that was mitzaref to piece B. Mao.
How can it be connected by water? What does it mean?
So you have maybe the kli was low, and there was a stream of water, like nitzuk of water, like when you have you spill some water and it connects the two. You have some water that connects, but you must have a flat, relatively flat kli, or you can have a kli that has a hole in the side of it, and then some water spilled and connected between that piece of flour and another piece of flour that's outside the kli.
That's momentarily, not all the time.
No, let's say you have a stream. That goes into the whole ither of is nitzuk. You have water that connects between this piece and that piece through a stream of water, right? You poured. And you look, and there's water that connects the two. So it's
Okay.
connected through water.
Okay.
Do we say kitman? When do we say that's kli mitzaref masha b'sochel kodesh? Those are things that are inside it. But to go from A to B within the kli, yes. But to go from B to C, which is outside now, oh dilmo kiven the mechaber mechaber. Once it's been connected to A, right? The tfuyum touched A. The kli made the piece B in the kli tome. And now you have a connection with water. What's wrong with that connection? Maybe chibur is a chibur and it creates tumma. And in fact, that seems to be how the Gemara is the svara. V'im tim soloimar kiven the mechaber mechaber. Maybe you'll say that svara. That chibur will work. We'll ask another question. Let's say the tumah came because the tfuyum touched the piece that's outside of the kli, touched piece C. And through the chibur of water, the tumah went to piece B in the kli. Chibur mayim v'tzeir of kli. Now you're using the connection with water and the combination with the kli. Mau kitna kli mitzarev. When do we see that a kli will be combine two pieces? That's only if the tfuyum touched the inside. But having the tumah come in from the outside, we wouldn't say that. How does the Gemara answer? Teiku. It's all left as a doubt. And we would paskin, it depends. If the case is midoraisa, we would paskin lechumra. If it's midrabanan, we would paskin lekula. Boy Rava. Yisron shacholko v'nit ma'echad mehem. You had an Yisron of a mincha that got divided into two pieces. One of them became tamei. V'inichu b'bisa. And then he put that piece that became tamei into a kli that had these two pieces that were not touching. V'chazor tzful yom v'naga b'oso tamei. Now, that piece that was put into the kli was already previously tamei. And now it's full yom touches that tamei piece. Mao. Mi amrin and savala tuma olo. Do we say that the piece that was tamei is satiated with tumah? It's full with tumah. And now when a new tful yom touches it, it can't add tumah to it. We said if a tful yom touches a piece that's in the kli, it can convey tumah to a piece that it doesn't touch. But that's when the piece was virgin. Nobody had ever touched it. This is a tamei piece. Maybe the tamei piece is not considered as if it has become metame because it's full of tumah. Do we say such a thing that a piece can become filled with tumah? Vatnan. Sadin tamei with medris. So we know that usually somebody who's tamei conveys tumah by touching it. But a zav or a zava, their tumah is more stringent. So if they sit, for example, on a sofa, or let's say they sit on 10 mattresses, and there are 10 mattresses piled up one on top of another, and they sit on the top mattress, all the mattresses become tamei. Because that's the stringency of tumas medras, even though they're not touching those individual mattresses, anything they sit on becomes tamei. And similarly, if they're on a sofa, anything on the other side of the sofa also becomes tamei. Now, this is a case where they sat on a sheet that covered a sofa. Ve'asal vilon. And now it's not a sheet anymore, it became a curtain. Now, a curtain cannot become tumas medris. Nobody sits on a curtain. So, Torah min medris, so it loses medris tuma, aval tami maga medris. But it will have tumah to the extent as if a zav had touched it. Nobody touched this curtain. It's a curtain, and it can't bring its tumah that it had to be elishi. Im nagabo azav, tame maga azav. If the zav eventually touches it, it becomes tame. And now this is what Abai learns. Ki nagabo azav mi tame. So if the zav touches it later on, it becomes tame. Vafilu lebesof. That's even if he had sat on it before. So we don't say that the tumah sort of was satiated. You can't convey new tumah to it. But why should we say that the zav touching it in the future is going to convey tumah? Lema savele tumah. Let us say that it's full. The sheet is full of tumah. Can't have new. Amar le umimai dahai she'im nagabos alavoser medris. Why are you learning that we're talking about a case where the zav touches the curtain after he had sat on it? Dilma mekame medris. Maybe he had touched it before he had sat on it. David tumah chamral tumah kala, which is a case of you have the stringent tumas medris on top of a tumas kal. Aval hacha the aida tumah kala. But if both one is touched and one is touched, then lo. Maybe we would say that that the item is satiated with tumah and you can't do any more. Elami seifa. So Abai wants to learn a proof from the seifa. Even Rabbi Yossi will say, you have two sheets on top of each other. The Yashav Zav and like we said, and a Zav sits on the top one, Sha'elyon Tomi Medris, V'atachta Tomi Medris Umaga. The one that he's sitting on is Tomi Medris. The one that is below the sheet is Tomi both Medris and Maga, because the sheet touched the lower sheet. But why? Maybe the bottom one should already be. Remember I said, even if he sits on 10 mattresses, all 10 get tumah. Why don't we just say it's full? It can't get a new tumah. Because hasam v'asachas. Here, where the zav sits, it's all happening at one time. But in the case that you brought, it's not at the same time that the mincha didn't become tummy at the same time with the same touch. One was tummy when it was in another kli and became tummy later on. Amar Rava. Isaron shechalku. Again, you have this half of Isaron, two halves. One of them got lost. V'hifrish acher tachtav. And he needs, you can't bring a mincha unless it's at least one Isaron. So he only has half of an Isaron. So he's mafresh another half. The nimtza rishon, and then you find the original half Isaron. So the first one that had always been there, right, which had not been lost. You have the lost one, and you have the new ones. You have three, and they're all in the same bowl. Nitma avud, if the one that had been lost and then found, that became tameh. So avud v'rishon mitzarfim. So it was in the kli initially with A, and then B got lost, and then B found again. So if B is the one that was lost and found, and someone touched B, so B and A are mitzaref because that was the one that was mitzaref kli, and mufresh ain't mitzaref. But the one that was designated afterwards remains tohor, because it had not been unified in the kli with the two in the nit originally. If the new one, nitma mufrash, if the one that was newly chosen to replace it, then mufrash for rishon mitzarfin, because they're in the same kli. Period. Avud ein mitzaref. The avud is the one that is lost, is out of the picture. Nitma rishon shnei mitzarfin, because both the lost one and the newly designated one were mitzarf with it. So if you touch the original piece that had never moved, all of them become tummy. However, Abayo Amar, afilu nitma echad mehem nami. If any of them, either the lost one or the newly mufresh one, becomes shneim mitztarfim, they're all combined. My timer, kulu b'nei bikta dadi adinu. They all belong to the same mincha. That's what he means by b'nei bikta. It's like the same domain. Theoretically, they come from the same mincha, and therefore the kli can be mitztarfim. Says Rava v'chein in kmitza. All of this will apply. Remember, we said let's say if your coinmates with part of it, does it work for the other part? Komatzmina avud. If you did the kmitza from the piece that had been lost and then brought together, shirayov v'rishon necholin. It's shirai. Remember, when you have a certain amount of flour and you do kmitza, the remainder is eaten. That's the shirayim, whatever is left after the kmitza. So shirav, that which remains after you did the first kmitza, and the rishon, which was mitzarf with the original kli, is necholin, mufresh and a nechol. But the one that was newly designated, it's not considered that you did kmitza on that one. Kamatz min mufresh. If you did the kmitza from the newly designated one, shirav rishon, it's shirayim, and the first one are eaten ovadei and nechol. Kamatz min rishon, then shneim necholim. And here Abai also argues, I feel kamatz me'echaber. If you did the kmitza with any of them, shneim ein necholin, you can't eat any of them. My time, kulunami b'nei vikta dadori ninu. They're all living in the same place, and none of them were present at the same time with the first one. That's the reason why he rejects the use of it. We're going to stop here. Tomorrow, shir will be at 3:00, like regular Fridays. Okay?
Okay. Shkoyach.
See some of you tonight.
Okay, good night.